Hello, and thanks everyone again for joining us today for the Business After Windows live Q&A sessions. Just remember, during these sessions, you can submit your questions anytime on Twitter by tweeting @BizAfterWindows with the hashtag #TheNewCloud. Up next, we'll be talking to Rob Brown, who spoke to us on relationships, trust, intimacy, and, oh yeah, data. Rob Brown has recently joined Informatica as Senior Cloud Architect. Informatica provides data integration software and services. Rob has spent the better part of the last 20 years dedicated to building, running, developing, and selling data-driven applications with companies such as Oracle, Salesforce, and more. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rob.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
We've got a bunch of questions for you, and I'm going to dive right in. Great presentation, Rob. Question: social listening is extremely powerful and allows companies to gain access to consumers' inner thoughts like never before. Are companies developing specific feedback apps to gain consumer information directly via perks, let's say? Or do companies prefer to stand listening from the social sidelines?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it was Kinsey that said any research has an impact on the answer. So when people know they're being monitored, I think, or when they're asked specifically to give an opinion, I think that influences or implies that they're going to respond a certain way. So if you're offering perks for people to give you feedback, that may not be the most sincere feedback you're going to get. However, when people are out on the open web just talking or blogging or tweeting, they do have some expectation of privacy, but they also know they're in a public forum. So they're going to be a lot more free about their ideas. So if you're offering perks, you may not get sincere data. When you're listening sort of obscurely to the open social sphere, you're probably going to get better data.
Great, thank you. So social selling and social listening seem to work better in a B2C context or scenario. Do you have any data on how successful this is in B2B context?
I'm sorry, I had a little technical buzz there. Can you repeat?
You got it. Sorry about that. Social
No
selling, social selling and social listening seem to work better in a B2C context or scenario. Do you have any data on how successful this approach is in a B2B context?
I don't really have numbers on any of this stuff. Most of my presentation came from personal experience, but we've certainly done work in both arenas. So I think, in B2B, we did some stuff with GE Healthcare, and it's actually a really great story, really great human interest story came out of this. GE Healthcare builds these huge MRI machines, and they found that kids and teenagers had terrible experiences with these MRI machines. And, when kids would go in and get put in these MRI machines, they would be just scared. It was a very hostile, very sort of rigid, sort of sterile place for them to go. And by GE listening, so GE obviously don't sell these machines to patients, they sell them to hospitals. And the feedback that they traditionally gotten from these machines was from doctors and from the administrators and the technicians that use the machines. And so the machines had typically been built to help the administrators and doctors, and they weren't set up to be really sort of, friendly environments for people to, go into. And cases with younger kids is about how terrified kids would be to go into these things. So they actually started to sit down and put together work groups to make these more sort of patient friendly. And so that's a scenario where social listening to the ultimate end user was very successful in a B2B environment. And you can extrapolate a couple seconds further. You can say, I think it was Boeing and Japan Airlines and Rolls-Royce, who's the engine manufacturer for the 787, set up a site where they could actually listen to the engines in flight and collaborate in real time across the three companies on 3 continents. So that's not really social listening per se, but it is setting up a social environment where the engines were providing feedback out into the social sphere. So that's kind of another spin on it. So there are ways to do it in B2B as well as B2C, but you're right. I mean, there's a lot more information on consumer brands, but if you are typically selling to in a B2B environment, ultimately, typically, that company is typically turning around and selling B2C in some form or another. So it's pertinent in both domains.
So then what I'm hearing maybe is don't stop just looking at business to business aspect. You want to kind of go a little bit farther and see who else it's going to touch and what else it's going to affect. Is that correct?
Absolutely, and that's the beauty of the web, right? For the first time, we've got this closed loop environment where we can get full feedback. I mean, the GE example is really good because GE was thinking, well, my customer is the hospital, but ultimately their customer was the person, the patient, who was actually going to be in the MRI machine. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we've got to think in that context as marketeers, as companies.
Excellent, thank you. Generally speaking, do you have any demographic numbers on which age group is responding to the best social marketing? I think we all want to say that 18 to 25-year-olds is the hot group, but I'm not so sure.
I don't generally have demographics. I was blown away by the work that we did with Toyota, though. When I walked into the room, when I was at Salesforce, the girl that headed up our social group, our listening group, she was 26 years old, and I'm 46 years old. So the amount of knowledge that she had about the demographic, about her audience, just blew me away. And she was the one, and I don't remember if I referenced the Toyota example in my presentation. I maybe didn't, but Toyota approached us a couple of years ago. Toyota Financial actually approached us a couple of years ago to help them sell cars to that demographic. Automotive manufacturers like to get new consumers at a very early age because once you buy a certain mark, you tend to stay with that mark. So it's really difficult to sell somebody who's already bought a Toyota, you know, a Honda, if they've already had 2 or 3 Toyotas. So what you want to do is you want to catch them when they're right out of high school the first time that they buy. So they came to us and said, how do we, you know, this is, you know, number one, this audience doesn't really tend to buy cars. Number 2, we don't know how to approach them in a social sphere, in a social context. And number 3, you know, they can't really afford cars. So we came up with this this proof of concept to do this crowdsource funding, and then get the message out about this crowdsource funding. And you know, like I said, this young lady came in, she was 26, and she said, well, this is the etiquette that you have to use. This is the way that you approach this particular demographic. These are the words that you want to use. These are the things that you want to listen for. So, I do agree that that's probably a large percentage of it, but I also think that seniors certainly now are becoming a much more increasing percentage of the social sphere. I think the ones that are not so much out there in the social sphere are those of us that are actually working from 9 to 5 every day.
Excellent, thank you so much. So for small companies, I think this style of social marketing is too costly. Is there a service out there that can do this for us and pass us the comments or product inquiries?
You'd be surprised, I think, how cost-effective it is to get into this. And you know, I'm trying to be agnostic to vendors, but I honestly do believe that Salesforce has the most comprehensive answer to this. They do a really good job of it, and you can buy a small number of licenses to do it internally, to do it in-house, to actually build a you know, a full-blown solution like Disney or Cisco. Yeah, it's millions and millions of dollars, but you can subscribe to small services. You can subscribe to different vendors out there who will give you, you know, as much as you need. So you can start small and you can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And it certainly doesn't have to break the bank.
Yeah, definitely. Have you come across a lot of companies that are afraid of this? Is this some like a kind of fear that you're seeing out there, or is it kind of going away a little bit?
I didn't hear the whole question. Sorry.
I was just asking if you've found that a lot of companies that are getting into the social realm are experiencing fear of this movement, or is it kind of evening out a little bit?
Well, I think, you know, the biggest trend that we've seen over the last couple of years is that marketing is getting more and more of the IT budget to spend. And, you know, it's always funny to me. Marketing tends to be a very data-driven, data-centric type of discipline. They're always looking at demographics, demographic profiles, doing analysis. And so I think that marketing is thrilled finally to have a closed-loop way of actually finding out whether there was a real ROI on a campaign because there's closed-loop capability. I mean, before you always had to draw a correlation. We spent $1 million on a campaign and we got $2 million in increased sales, but you couldn't really tie it one-to-one. So I think that sort of the mystique of this whole thing and kind of, is it prudent? Is it eavesdropping? I think that's all sort of going away because, like I said, marketing folks tend to be very data-centric anyway. And now that a lot of this stuff doesn't have to be implemented, it can be subscribed to on a cloud basis. I think that there's the barriers to entry are coming down. But I also think too, though, that a lot of this stuff is driving big data, and big data is very expensive. So to get really good results, to have huge cross sections, somewhere that data has to reside. It has to be persisted, and that's expensive. So from that perspective, if you try to do it in-house, it can be cost prohibitive. Mm-hmm. So. But I think the mystique of it is going away, and I think people can jump out there and they can sort of sample it on a very small basis, on a subscription basis, on a trial basis even.
So you're talking a little bit about big data, and this question is a little bit off topic, but I'd like to hear your input on it. Mm-hmm. The Facebook experiment that they did, where they kind of changed it so that certain people would see only positive messages and certain people would see only negative messages. What do you think about that, and maybe the implications it has with people's fear of privacy and marketing and that type of thing?
Well, I think I'm of convenience a long time ago, and I think that anybody who's going to be out, in the public spectrum saying anything, they have to, at a certain level, be cognizant of the fact that they're really not in a private forum anymore or in a private venue. So, and that's really why my presentation was about trust and intimacy. I'm very aware as a consumer of the types of information that I put out into the public domain, and I give certain organizations a lot of information about myself. My healthcare provider knows an awful lot about it, and I'm probably not going to move healthcare providers because I've reached a certain level of intimacy with them where I'm okay giving them a lot of information about me. My bank has a lot of information about me, and I don't want to go through that process of giving somebody a whole ton of information again. And to use an example, I'm a one brand guy, and that brand has a whole bunch of data about me, and I don't want to go through that again. So I trust that they will only campaign to me or cater to me about things about which I care. So that's my attitude towards it. It is that I do business with certain retailers because I know shirt size, and they know what kind of, they're not going to call me up and go, hey, we're having a blowout sale on two-piece bikinis next week. How many do you want? When, obviously I don't want a two-piece bikini, right? So, they'll call me when a certain suit is going to go on sale that they know that I'm interested in, and I appreciate that, but I don't appreciate getting spammed with, messages for, diapers because I don't have kids. So I think that's really what it's all about. It's all about creating trust and being intimate with a brand and trusting that brand is going to cater to you based on you as an individual and your individual likes and needs, as opposed to sort of the blanket spray and pray approach that we've seen for the last 5 decades.
Great, thank you. Next question. For a company that operates in the retail space with 10 locations, approximately 350 to 500 million annual revenue, what should we budget for a social listening and marketing campaign? Ooh.
I think that's a tough question. I think, to me, ends justify means. So I think it's a prudent and to do some really highly focused dividends, then increase the budget. But don't sort of go in and say, okay, we're a $500 million company, we got to spend 10% of our budget on social campaigning. I was at a startup back in 2009, and we did a very, very, very highly focused campaign, and we got a 13% hit rate, and we didn't spend that much. Well, we spent, we were pre-revenue, so we were spending, our annual gross budget, I think, was about $350,000. No, it was more than that. Spending about $50,000-$60,000 a year on our campaigns, and our campaigns were yielding 13% contact rates. I think the more specialized and targeted you can get with this stuff, I think you have money to get targeted, because you're listening to find out what people are saying so that you can address. I think you can start it with $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year.
Great. 2 questions now. How can one hide from social marketers without checking out from social media altogether? And in a way, what you were describing sounds like the early Wild Wild West days of email spam prior to the CAN-SPAM Act. Eventually, social listening and marketing will be regulated as well. Do you agree?
I hope not. I'm a capitalist, and I don't like Big Brother. The last thing I want is government out on the web. So I think it goes back to my earlier comment. I think we all have to be aware of the fact that when we're in the social sphere, we have a less of an expectation of privacy. I think we all have to be cognizant of that. So, I used to tell my daughter all the time, she was born in 1998. Yours is the first generation that's going to have a digital signature for their entire life, right? I was not out blogging in the 1970s and 80s, right? It's just there. So, expectation of privacy, but I think we all have to be aware that physically we conduct ourselves in a certain, right? We're expected not to walk up to people and cuss them out. We're expected to when you're out on the web. But when I go out and I tweet, these tennis shoes sucked, I would actually encourage somebody from Nike to call me up and say, hey, how come your tennis shoes suck? What can we do to give you a better experience? Because in a way, that's really what I'm saying. I'm out there saying, look, I've got an opinion, and I want you to hear my opinion, and my opinion should count. So I don't want Congress to step in and say, I don't want you listening for Rob's opinion. So I hope that there's never any recourse that way. With regard to the first question, how do I become more obscure? If you want to go out and say things on Facebook that you only want your friends to hear, then you make them private. And you can post publicly and privately. And I think more and more we're going to see the providers of these services give us the opinion to make things private and also broadcast them to the greater web sphere.
So Rob, there are so many cloud-based marketing analytics services out there, it's hard to separate the Me Too providers from those who actually offer something unique. Can you suggest a few marketing companies that have a social slant and have something special to offer?
Like I said, I kind of wanted to be agnostic on this stuff. I think a lot of different vendors bring a lot to the table. Obviously, I've spent the last 3 years at 2 companies, Salesforce.com and Oracle, so I can comment on both of their solutions pretty effectively. I think culturally, if you compare those 2 organizations, sort of Oracle being the sales and Roebuck of the information age, they've got pockets of expertise on this stuff that are really good within their CX or CRM organization. But I think across the board, Salesforce does a really, really good job of this. And I think just culturally, everybody in that organization is probably a little more up to date, I guess, on this subject. So that'd be a great place to start. But Adobe has some great solutions, and there's a lot of sort of boutique vendors. As a data architect, as an information architect, really, I'm most concerned around getting the feed and then correlating that data with other data. So I don't want to look at just social data in the context of, wow, Henry Jones out there said that my Kentucky Fried Chicken didn't taste very good. What I want to do is I want to be able to take Henry Jones and take that comment and put it into context and say, well, who is Henry Jones? Is he a competitor? Is he part of another organization? Is he in my database? What do I know about him? Can I go out to LinkedIn and find out who he is? What kind of following does he have? What kind of social stature has he got? What kind of influencer is he? So I think just listening and just getting data from one source is not the whole picture. You've got to really look and correlate the data. So I think you've really got to talk to 2 or 3 different vendors and get 2 or 3 perspectives.
Mm-hmm. Great. And the final question we've got here. This was an amazing presentation. Where will you be speaking next? Do you ever go to the Chicago area to give talks?
Well, it's a funny thing. I hadn't really done any talks in any forums since I did a lot of speaking on SaaS and a lot of speaking on platform as a service, and the movement from on-premise to SaaS back in sort of 2009, 2010, and worked with Rick and SaaS University. And in my roles at both Salesforce and Oracle, I didn't really have time to do a lot of presenting. So I'd love to do more. I've done some stuff at Cloud World. I've done some stuff at Oracle World. I've done some stuff at Always On that are all sort of Bay Area centric forums. I've done a lot down here in Southern California, Los Angeles, and San Diego. But funny enough, I was in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, and if it was the right opportunity, I'd certainly be more than flattered and thrilled to come speak at anything that's going on there.
So to all our participants, if you've got something cool coming up in Chicago, get in touch with Rob. So thank you again so much. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate you joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks again to everybody for joining us today. And to catch the next session, return to www.businessafterwindows.com, scroll down to the Q&A session schedule, and click the live Q&A button. Thanks again.